The housing bubble. Why hasn't the bubble burst? The truth behind the housing bubble. Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is your premier destination for personal finance, investing, and real estate with your host, Danish. Unlike the stock market, where people understand and accept the risk that prices will fall from time to time, sometimes severely. On the flip side, many people who buy a home don't really think that the value of their home will ever decrease by all that much. Ready to find out more about the housing bubble? Let's get started. Historically, the housing market has not been affected by price bubbles, especially when compared to other asset classes. Part of this is due to large transaction costs that are associated with purchasing a home, not to mention the carrying costs of owning a home, such as repairs and maintenance. However, housing markets do sometimes go through periods of irrational price increases, like what we're seeing today with Canada's housing market, the housing market in some parts of the US and the UK. In theory, after this period of irrational price increases and market speculations, prices are generally expected to fall back in line. This is called reversion to the mean. Big question here is, when does today's housing market see the other side of the equation and prices fall off that cliff? And when does that bubble burst? First, what is a housing bubble? Before getting into the causes of housing bubbles and what makes them go pop, it is important to understand how a housing bubble forms in the first place. They generally begin with a jump in housing demand, despite a limited amount of inventory available. Demand further increases as speculators enter the market, making the bubble bigger as they snap up investment properties and fixer-uppers for flips. With limited supply and so much new demand, prices naturally rise. Housing bubbles have a direct impact on the real estate industry, but also homeowners and their personal finances. These bubbles force people to find ways to keep up with their mortgage payments when times suddenly turn and things get tough. Some may even have to dig deeper into their pockets, using savings and retirement funds just to keep their home. Others will go bankrupt and forced into foreclosure. Any bubble, historically, is just a temporary event. Although, bubbles in equities and other asset classes can happen more frequently. Speaking of which, what's up with Bitcoin? Housing bubbles, on the other hand, can persist for much longer, according to the International Monetary Fund, and can last several years. So that's what housing bubbles are in a nutshell. But what causes them? The price of housing, like any other good or service in a free market, is driven by the law of supply and demand. When demand increases or supply decreases, prices, they go up. Prices rise as demand tends to outpace supply. The supply of housing can also be slow to react to increases in demand because it takes a long time to build a home or fix it up. And in highly developed areas, there simply isn't any more land to build on. So if there is a sudden or prolonged increase in demand, prices are sure to rise. Toronto, Vancouver, San Francisco, New York, London are all great examples of this phenomenon. There isn't much land left for new development, so builders have to focus on high-rise spaces wherever they can find parcels of land still available, or shift into redevelopment, which can take even more time. What causes that increase in demand? One reason is that a rise in general economic activity and increased prosperity puts more disposable income into the hands of consumers and encourages home ownership. In simple terms, more money in your hands due to good economic times means you're more likely to spend those extra dollars on housing. Another reason is that an increase in the population or a specific demographic segment entering the housing market. When there's an influx of people wanting to buy a home, this naturally creates more demand. For example, a policy change that causes an influx of immigrants coming to Toronto or Vancouver will increase demand for housing as these new residents settle in and look to purchase a new home. So that's two reasons. Another reason, a low general level of interest rates, particularly short-term interest rates, that makes homes more affordable. Cheap money in the markets increases buying power so you can buy a bigger home. Reason number 4, innovative or new mortgage products with low initial monthly payments makes homes more affordable for new demographic segments. A good example of this, in Canada, there was a recently announced first-time home buyers incentive program from the government, which will give you up to 10% of your home's purchase price to put towards a down payment, which then decreases your monthly mortgage payment. Reason number 5, easy access to credit, often with lower underwriting standards. This also brings more buyers into the market. Put simply, this is about flooding the market with cheap debt. Make debt more accessible, and naturally, people will borrow more. And what do they do with those borrowed funds? They go out and buy bigger homes. More often than not, people want to buy the biggest home they can with the maximum mortgage they can get away with. The problem isn't people trying to buy the biggest home they can. The problem is when everyone can get cheap debt and they'll compete with each other to buy that single home. And some may end up overpaying with a mortgage that they probably can't afford, especially when interest rates change. Another reason is high-yielding structured mortgage bonds, or MBS, as demanded by Wall Street investors that make more mortgage credit available to borrowers. I'm sure many of you out there remember the epic US housing crash back in 2008 that was built on the backs of mortgage-backed securities. Another cause is a short-term relationship between a mortgage broker and a borrower, where sometimes borrowers are encouraged to take excessive risks. The financial industry is built on borrowers borrowing as much money as possible. That's how the financial industry makes its money. Next cause, a lack of financial literacy and excessive risk-taking by mortgage borrowers. This is important. I found a lot of people who do not budget accordingly end up with debt levels they may not be able to support. If you find yourself wanting to get better at managing your own finances and improving your financial literacy, make sure you've hit that like and subscribe button so you're the first ones to know when new videos come out on my channel, as my goal is to make investor education and financial literacy accessible to everyone without those hefty fees. Back to the causes, speculative and risky behavior by home buyers and real estate investors with unrealistic and unsustainable expectations that home prices will continue to appreciate indefinitely. Do I need to say more? Toronto, Vancouver, London, Hong Kong, San Francisco, New York, the list goes on. Last cause, self-explanatory, an increase in home flipping. Each of these causes can combine with one another to really cause a housing market bubble to take off. It should be no surprise that these causes are linked to one another and tend to feed off of each other. The simple truth is, like all bubbles, an uptick in activity and prices paved the way for excessive risk-taking and speculative behavior by all market participants, buyers, borrowers, lenders, builders, and investors. Everyone rushes in thinking the party will go on forever. But like all bubbles, they all burst. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So we've looked at what is a housing bubble and the factors that lead to a housing bubble. Now let's turn our attention to what can cause that bubble to burst. The bubble finally bursts when excessive risk-taking becomes pervasive throughout the entire housing system, and prices no longer reflect anything close to fundamentals. This happens when the supply for housing is still increasing in response to a prior demand spike. Remember, there is a lag as housing supply has to play catch up to demand, since it takes time for new homes to be built. In other words, demand decreases while supply is still increasing. This results in a sharp drop in prices as nobody is left to pay for even more homes and even higher prices. The realization of risk throughout the system is triggered by losses suffered by homeowners, mortgage lenders, mortgage investors, and property investors. These realizations can be triggered by a few factors. First, an increase in interest rates that puts homeownership out of reach for some buyers, and in some instances, makes the home a person currently lives in unaffordable. This often leads to default and foreclosure, which eventually adds to the current supply available in the market. Second factor, a downturn in general economic activity. This leads to less disposable income, job losses, or fewer jobs available, which decreases the demand for housing. A recession is particularly dangerous. I have a video up that walks you through how to prepare for a recession. Third factor, demand is exhausted, brings supply and demand into equilibrium, and slowing the rapid pace of home price appreciation that some homeowners, particularly speculators, count on to make their purchases more affordable or profitable. When rapid price increases stops, those who count on it to afford their home may lose their home, bringing even more supply to the market. Whether or not the housing bubble is ready to burst in the UK, Canada, or the US will depend on a combination of these factors. Specifically, in Canada, there is a group of would-be buyers keen to move up the property ladder, but are trapped by a flood of condos hitting the Toronto and Vancouver real estate markets. This situation is only expected to worsen with a near record of condos under construction. Canada is not alone in this trend. The COVID-19 pandemic has sped up the flight to the suburbs, with big city condo owners trading up to detached homes with backyards and home offices. This trend is also happening in cities like New York and London. The bottom line is, when losses mount, credit standards are tightened, easy mortgage borrowing is no longer available, demand decreases and supply increases, speculators leave the market, prices fall, and bubbles, well, they burst. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, leave your comments below, and I'll catch you in the next video.